All right, this is If My People Bible reading. We are in the book of First Timothy, and this is reading part number 212. Uh, it, Timothy starts off with a bang, and I'm going to read it. I'm going to start off with chapter 1, just the first couple verses, and just listen to what is said. Chapter 1, verse 1. Paul, an apostle, possible of Messiah Yeshua, by the command of Elohim our Savior and Messiah Yeshua our hope. That's a huge opening. To Timothy, my true son in the faith, grace, mercy, peace. Grace, mercy, shalom. From Yahweh the Father and Messiah Yeshua our Master. Verse 3, as I urged you when I went into Macedonia, stay there in Ephesus so that you may command certain men not to teach false doctrines any longer. What are the false doctrines? Well, that's the tons of stuff that the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the Herodian government was running. Okay, there's no doubt about that. There's things like gleaning from the field when Yeshua was and his disciples were eating from the field, eating the grains, and the Pharisees saying that's Torah. You're breaking Torah. That's a bold-faced lie. How to wash your hands a certain way. That is nonsense. It's just a way to make somebody better than you. That's what it's all about. And the Father's not going to put up with anyone, Jewish people, Pentecostal people, Presbyterian, Catholic people who think they're better than somebody else. He's not going to put up with it. He hasn't done anything to them yet. We'll wait and see. Verse 4, nor to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies. But I'm Jewish, so I'm better than you. Or I'm not Jewish, and I'm Thor. I'm Thor, king of the north. These promote controversies rather than Elohim's work, which is by faith. Verse 5, Torah, the first Torah of Timothy. Now this is Paul. The goal of this command, the goal of this Torah is love, charity, which comes from a pure heart and a good conscience and sincere faith. Heart, conscience, faith, pure. Some have wandered away from these and turned to meaningless talk. They want to be teachers of the Torah, but they do not know what they're talking about or what they so confidently affirm. We know that Torah is good if one uses it properly. Okay. Comment. This is an example of Torah, the book of instruction, detailing what is good and what's evil. The tree of good and knowledge was, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was never meant to be eaten. But they did. They took it in. That doesn't mean an apple on a fruit, okay? But since Adam, we have had to live under the tree of good and evil until Shiloh came. Now we remain human until the second coming of Yeshua, although we are kept for salvation. People call it being saved. Because we are on this earth with earthly bodies, the Word, nailed to the tree, permits Ruach HaKodesh to live in our hearts so that we may have sanctification until His return. We are no longer under the Torah. We know and respect that Torah is the living Word. We are not under it. We stand on it. The tree was not evil, as most institutional churches teach, most Messianic people teach, most Hebrew people teach. They teach that tree was evil, that it was Satan. Satan got into the tree. The knowledge of good and evil is law. You can't have a justice system without the knowledge of good and evil. You got to have just judges who make decisions. So, but as we sin and continue to fall until the Father permitted His Son Yeshua to die for our sins. This mystery is now revealed. The tree of good and evil. The mystery is that Yeshua lives within us. We talked about that in the last reading. Verse 9. We also know that Torah was not made for the righteous. Catch this one. Verse 9. We also know that Torah was not made for the righteous, but for the lawbreakers and the rebels, the wicked and the sinful, the unholy, the irreligious, and those who kill their fathers and mothers, for murderers, for adulterers, for perverts, for slave traders, for liars, for perjurers, and for whatever else is contrary to sound doctrine. Comment. Well, here we go again. Torah was not made for the righteous, but for the lawless ones. It was meant even in the Garden of Eden, for Adam and Eve, mankind, to live with the tree of life and not partake in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Torah. Yahweh gave them just a few commands in the garden. Total of 3, but, take care of the garden and be fruitful and multiply, and don't eat from the tree. Don't take on what that tree is. That's exactly what this If My People Bible is all about. And that's why, if you really understood what I just said, you will not be allowed in almost any institutionalized Christian church. You will not be allowed into most any Hebrew roots. You may be able to attend Hebrew roots, but they won't listen to a word you say. Only a remnant. All the groups I've gone to, there's always just 1 or 2 that get it. And the rest of the group just sit there with that look, and then they fire all these questions at you, and they ask things, menial matters, matters that are small, but wanting to start an argument. They'd rather argue than sit there and pray for one another. They'd rather argue than love one another. They'd rather argue than keep a pure heart. They'd rather do meaningless talk. Everything Paul just said. So, will I continue with this? I can't back down. Does it mean that certain people won't invite me to their home anymore? I hear this from them. Well, it's in my home, it's my way. I understand it's your home and it's your way. But do you really listen to what I just said? Because I didn't say anything. Paul said it. And he said it again and again and again. And either most Christians and most Hebrew roots don't listen to what Paul says, don't hear and obey, because what Paul says comes from Yeshua, what Yeshua says comes from the Father. It's like that. That's the circle of communication. That's what makes you joyful, and yet you're sad, because you're joyful when 1 out of 100 people understands and becomes a shepherd. And you're sad because the other 99 remain sheep, or they just walk away from you cold, very cold. Well, let's have an oneg, which, by the way, doesn't mean eating. But I've been to almost 100 onegs or more, and it's always about eating. As we'll get into the word again, Yeshua says in the New Covenant, don't go, and this is through Paul, don't go to someone's house for Passover hungry. And that's exactly what most everyone does in Easter, Thanksgiving, when people get together. They're hungry. They go there, I'm going to eat up because someone else is doing all the cooking, and then there's the host, and I'm coming with a hungry stomach. And I'll listen to the word, but not for too long, because let's eat. Paul and Yeshua says, don't do that. And I have even been to some certain churches that take communion using bread and not just these tiny little cracker things, whatever that is, that they have the cross symbol in it. I'm not sure exactly what that smashed wafer thing is for, but anyway, I've seen people take handfuls and even of the bread of communion and use communion to fill their stomachs. All right. Let's get into chapter 2, verse 1, 2, 3. All Torah. Urge, then, first of all, the requests, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for everyone, for the kings and all those in authority, that we may live in shalom and quiet lives in all Elohimness and in all kadoshness, in all being kadosh. This is good and pleases Elohim our Yeshua, who wants all men to be saved. There's that word saved. So well, being saved is not in the Bible. Well, there it is. And come to the knowledge of the truth. Now, in the Christian churches, they say, oh, yeah, being saved is in there, and then they can't find it. And Hebrew says, oh, it's not in there. It's about hearing and obeying Torah. Well, it says at least 15, 20 times Torah is not the way to salvation at all. And here you just heard from the Father saying, it's not even for you. Remember? So if it's not even for me, then we go back to that tree in the Garden of Eden is not an evil tree. It was not meant to be taken in, followed. He always said, don't do that. I mean, you could do all this stuff in the whole wide world, Adam and Eve, but don't do that. Don't do that. And I noticed they weren't fruitful and multiplied till after they were banished from the garden. Go figure. All right. Verse 8. Torah. Verse 9. Torah. Verse 10, 11, and 12. Torah. I want men everywhere to lift up kadosh hands in prayer without anger, disrupting. I also want women to dress modestly with decency and propriety, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or expensive clothes. It's not just the opposite what I saw growing up. But with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship Elohim. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over man. She must be silent. Now, that's talking about the priesthood. And everything else, not true. Because a woman can be a prophetess. A woman can be teaching children. And in like small groups that have nothing to do with doctrines and so forth. They can do a myriad of things. There's like all this to do, and then people want to argue about that one thing. Oh, well, because they can't do that, you men are superior. No, has nothing to do with it. There's a reason for it. It's in the DNA and given to a man, and there's a reason for it. Do we know 1,000% of the truth of why? No. If Yahweh had wanted us to have known, he would have said so. And just remember, though the lowest will be the highest in the kingdom. So if men and women think that men are higher right now than they are, then when they go to the kingdom, it's just the opposite. So, so the women ought to be pretty happy right now. They can pull back a little bit, live a better life, more comfortable than having to make a decision in which I told you not to do that. So men can't do that. They can say, well, I know I told you to do that, but I made a decision that you could, and it was wrong, so guess who's wrong? The man. The man is always wrong in a situation. That's not unfair. That's fair. See how that works? Okay. See you at the next, we'll be at 2:13 next. Keep reading in 1 Timothy. Thank you, and God bless. Captain Kangaroo said that. God bless.